Welcome back everybody, I'm Nick930, and today I want to share with you my thoughts on Tango Gameworks' recently released title, Ghostwire Tokyo. Ghostwire Tokyo is a first-person, open-world action RPG, now available for both the PlayStation 5 and the PC. In it, players explore a large urban recreation of the downtown Tokyo area, in the midst of a strange paranormal event, where all the city's inhabitants have seemingly vanished and been replaced by a swarm of terrifying apparitions called the Visitors. To help combat these visitors, the player is armed not with conventional weapons like blades or firearms, but with magic, created by making complicated hand gestures. As the player ventures deeper into the rain-soaked streets of this nightmare version of Tokyo, they'll face even more deadly foes, and will therefore need to steadily enhance their abilities using earned skill points, while simultaneously rescuing any lost souls they can find along the way. It's a highly original setting for a game, providing an eerily gorgeous portrayal of modern Tokyo, while infusing some classical elements to help expand upon Japan's rich culture. However, after playing through the game's main campaign and completing all of its available side missions, I couldn't shake the feeling that I've already played this before. Everything about the core gameplay loop feels derivative of other open-world games, from its skill tree-based progression system to its overly cluttered default map view. What's more, Ghostwire also has a few technical hiccups that are worth discussing, despite offering some gorgeous ray-traced eye candy. But before we get into all that, let's first take a spoiler-free look at the game's story. Ghostwire Tokyo begins shortly after a deadly car accident in the iconic Shibuya crossing. As witnesses rush in to check for survivors, a mysterious spirit arrives at the scene and possesses the body of one of the victims, a young man named Akito. Soon after Akito is revived, an ominous fog rolls through the city, transforming everyone else into spirits, and a parade of terrifying visitors slowly makes their way down the street, rallied by a mysterious man wearing a Hanya mask. The player takes on the role of this partially possessed Akito, who, alongside his new spiritual partner, KK, must set out across Tokyo to find his ill sister and put a stop to the masked man's insidious plot. Despite its unique premise, it's a fairly straightforward plot. In fact, the Six Sister backstory feels eerily similar to another major game released only a few months ago. But what really helps make the story work is the unique symbiotic relationship between Akito and his spiritual companion, KK. All throughout the game, these two characters will share their thoughts on what's happening, whether it be a fun back and forth regarding some sort of cultural reference, or a more serious shared empathy after a dark discovery. The strengthening of this bond goes hand in hand with the game's pacing as well, and helps keep an otherwise simple, save the princess style narrative choice from feeling too derivative. What's more, the game's setting does a fantastic job of really immersing the player into the world, meshing modern Japanese culture with traditional elements, and making them an integral part of the available gameplay systems. Torii gates, for example, that traditionally are used as gateways to sacred spaces like shrines, must be cleansed of corruption, which then pushes back the deadly fog and expands the playable space. Doing so also unlocks additional fast travel points, and typically rewards the player with useful tools and items to enhance Akito. Once the fog is receded, players can then proceed into the newly cleansed district, where they can continue their journey at designated quest marks, or alternatively, rescue the thousands of lost spirits floating in and around the city. To do so, players can make use of small paper dolls called Katashiro, that can be used to absorb nearby clusters of spirits. Once captured, these spirits must then be delivered to any nearby telephone booth, which will net the player a large amount of XP relative to the number of spirits on hand. This is one of the primary goals of Ghostwire Tokyo's open world, as spirits can be found floating all over the place, from back alleys and street corners to high up on the rooftops and large billboards. Some spirits may even be trapped by various forms of corruption, which must be purged by various means like targeting a weak point hidden to the naked eye, or performing a sort of Simon Says hand gesture using the right joystick. Some spirits may even require rescuing through timed defense sequences, requiring players to battle off enemies, attempting to seal them away in large containers. Alongside these standard spirits, the city also plays host to a wide variety of different playful yokai, who offer unique challenges to the player as they attempt to absorb their power. This includes chasing down flying yokai across the rooftops, seeking out tanuki hiding behind objects on the ground, or sneaking up on unsuspecting kappas by baiting them with a carefully placed cucumber. If players are successful, the yokai will relinquish their power in the form of Magatama, a necessity for unlocking more powerful skills and abilities. To help get around town and capture all these elusive spirits, players can perform basic first-person actions like running, jumping, and mantling onto high ledges. Though, with the help of some flying Tengu spirits, players can grapple up onto high rooftops and even glide through the air for a short time, with no threat of any fall damage to worry about. When players need a break from the rain, they can enter one of the many corner bodegas, managed by a flying Nekomata, who offers a large selection of different healing items, buffs, and extra katashiro to make the player's spirit-chasing job easier. If you're more of a dog person, the streets of Tokyo are also rife with friendly Shiba Inu, who will gladly lead the player to some hidden items in exchange for dog food. It's a delightfully absurd open world, capturing a wide range of Japanese folklore and modern Japanese culture. But the friendly spirits and talking dogs are only a small part of the full picture. A horde of dark spirits referred to as visitors have taken control of Tokyo and occupy the various streets, alleys, and rooftops, along with most interior spaces as well. The most common of these visitors are the Rainwalkers, tall, suit-wearing, faceless ghosts armed with only an umbrella. Well, an umbrella and a variety of magical attacks depending on the variant that the player encounters. There's several different types of Rainwalkers, easily identifiable by the color of their clothing and their size. In addition to the Rainwalkers, Tokyo streets are also haunted by headless students that are considerably weaker but more agile and often attack in packs. Then there's the more mage-like paper dolls that will launch volleys of magical attacks at the player from a distance, or heal other visitors during the course of a fight. Considering the somewhat repetitive nature of the game's mission designs, Ghostwire Tokyo's enemy variety is excellent, as I felt that even 20 hours in, I was still being introduced to new enemy types with some genuinely disturbing designs, and their large variety of attacks required lots of adjustment, taking full advantage of everything in the player's arsenal. Which brings us to the real core of the experience, the combat. As I said before, Ghostwire Tokyo doesn't involve any typical conventional firearms or melee weapons, but instead is built almost exclusively around a series of magical hand gestures, inspired largely by the ninjutsu meditation practice of Kuji-kiri. With the help of KK's spiritual power, the player can launch a powerful blast of magical energy using these hand gestures, each with a distinctive color and projectile style that can be swapped between to suit the situation. The standard wind weave, for example, appear as green energy blasts and can be fired rapidly at medium range. Red fire, on the other hand, is slower, but significantly more powerful, and can be used to penetrate enemy defenses and reach distant targets. And the blue water is intended for more short-range encounters, and shoots out with a wide spread to prevent being surrounded. Along with these attacks, players can also press and hold for more powerful variations of each power, an extremely helpful option when faced with larger groups. The catch is that each of these powers do have limited ammunition, and must be refilled by finding magical ether of the same color, hidden inside unusual shimmering objects floating around the environment. As players lob these magical attacks at their creepy adversaries, a bright glowing orb will slowly reveal itself. This is the key to defeating every enemy in the game, as extracting this orb will instantly destroy the visitor and cause them to evaporate into thin air. Doing so will also replenish the player's health and restore some ammunition, making it worthwhile to not mistakenly finish off enemies with their orb still intact. Sometimes, it may even be possible to extract these orbs without ever engaging in direct confrontation. By dropping into a crouched stance, players can easily sneak up on unsuspecting visitors and extract their cores with a stealth attack. But when these close-range takedowns aren't possible, players can also make use of their mystical bow and silently lob arrows from a distance, assuming they can master the pretty unforgiving drop-off. Other times, it's worth avoiding confrontation altogether, and thanks to helpful gadgets called talismans, players can toss out things like distractions, stun enemies with a sort of electrical AoE, or even create large thickets out of thin air, effectively blocking an enemy's line of sight. Personally, I didn't get very much use out of these talisman abilities in my own playthrough, as I found there was very little incentive to remain stealthy outside of avoiding a potentially challenging conflict. And because there's so many healing items available almost all the time, direct confrontations are generally pretty manageable so long as the player makes effective use of their space. Occasionally, the story will strip away the player's powers entirely, essentially requiring that a stealth approach be taken. Though these are arguably some of the weakest segments in the game, as the core of the stealth action is still just a basic line of sight design. Next, let's take a moment to talk about Ghostwire Tokyo's progression system. As I mentioned previously, a major part of the game's progression involves collecting spirits and turning them in at phone booths to bank XP. But main missions and side activities will similarly grant the player XP, allowing for a steady pace as players progress further in the narrative. After leveling up, players are regularly rewarded with additional skill points, which in turn can be spent to unlock upgrades in the game's provided skill tree. The skill tree is broken up into 3 categories: abilities, ethereal weaving, and equipment, all 3 of which are pretty self-explanatory. Along with this main progression system, players can also increase ammo capacity for each of their 3 powers by praying at individual Jizo statues hidden in the game world, or even equip passive buffs by means of special prayer beads found at various torii gates. So far, that's a lot to take in. From all the different types of spirits to the multitude of different upgrade systems and open world encounters, it can feel a bit overwhelming. But thanks to some solid pacing design and an easy to navigate menu system, it's all made quite simple. And even with its admittedly unoriginal gameplay design, I still found myself happily engrossed in the experience and eager to play more. And I think a big part of that, at least for me personally, is Ghostwire's impressive visual design. Now, at first glance, Ghostwire may not come off looking like the most technically advanced game out there. The character models are pretty basic by today's standards. Animation designs and texture quality isn't the best. And the global illumination effect, despite being extremely demanding in regards to the performance, feels somewhat hit or miss, making scenes feel unrealistically bright, especially in the interior spaces. But the overall visual style of the game's rainy Tokyo streets provides an absolutely gorgeous backdrop for the action, and it's so well realized that even each individual rain droplet, when viewed up close, forms unique kanji symbols. Then of course, we can't ignore the fantastic implementation of ray trace reflections that will almost perfectly reflect the images of various billboards and advertisements across multiple surfaces simultaneously. It's possibly one of the most impressive uses of the effect I've seen in a while now, as this particular setting seems to be the perfect fit to really demonstrate its potential. Though this obviously comes at a considerable cost, as performance will suffer greatly with these effects cranked up. Options like DLSS do a decent job of alleviating this problem, but as expected, other oddities like blurred object trails appear whenever the player is stationary, something that can be quite distracting when standing still and looking at the rain as it falls. What's more, I found it odd that despite some great reflections outdoors, Ghostwire's occasional smaller mirrors found in interior spaces weirdly have no reflections at all. Another issue I have is the perceived depth of the city itself. While Tango Gameworks' haunting recreation of Tokyo seems to be fairly dense at a surface level, it is a bit disappointing just how many building layouts are reused all throughout the game. You'll regularly enter interior spaces for side missions, only to learn that the structure is identical to the one that you just visited, only with a slightly different arrangement of the smaller decorative items. Many exterior stairwells are also blocked by invisible walls, which is an odd design choice considering they could just have easily put up some sort of yellow tape or other physical barrier to avoid this confusion altogether. Finally, I also experienced a decent amount of stuttering throughout my playthrough, even after switching the game over to an SSD to alleviate any potential streaming issues. Many performance-based issues can be resolved by just disabling the intensive ray tracing options, though it does seem like a disservice for a game like this, where the ray-traced effects really are one of the most attractive aspects. Overall, Ghostwire Tokyo is a highly original game built around a number of tired gameplay tropes. For players that have played open-world action RPGs before, this game really doesn't offer much to stand apart. though its charming paranormal buddy cop style narrative, mixed with its large amount of Japanese cultural influence and absolutely gorgeous lighting effects, do help a great amount. If there were any things I'd like to see improved with a potential sequel or follow-up, it would probably be to the game's general movement and combat abilities. Not necessarily the magical powers themselves, but rather the ability to evade. I was surprised to find that there's no dodge option, despite there being a number of opportunities where a dodge would have been extremely helpful. Traversing through such an urban environment would have also benefited greatly from some more parkour elements, or at the very least, less input latency, as there seems to be a weird delay whenever the player's camera is rotated. Also found it annoying that whenever the player lands from a glide, Aikido has a tendency to weirdly enter a crouch stance without me having pressed the crouch button at all, which can slow down movement and make it difficult to follow up on a successive glide. But other than that, I think Ghostwire Tokyo is a fine game, and certainly worth checking out. Though for players tired of cleaning up open world map icons and lighting up skill trees, this one might be better saved for a midsummer sale instead. But what do you guys think? Are you enjoying Ghostwire Tokyo? Let me know in the comment section. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more content posted every week.